She was there. Everyone remembered that. Just a few feet from the front porch of the small white house on Hickory Street, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. Emily Sanderson knelt on the warm concrete and traced chalk lines around her bare feet. Her laugh had echoed over the trimmed hedges and under the trimmed oaks. Her mother, Danielle, heard it as she washed dishes at the kitchen sink, occasionally glancing out the window, noting the light shift in shadows, the way the breeze tousled Emily's curly dark hair. Her father, Michael, had been at work at the nearby shipping yard, 3 hours into a 12-hour shift, and her brother, Caleb, had been in the living room playing with action figures, the kind that always lost their arms within a week. When Danielle called out for lunch, the yard was still. The chalk lay on the ground in pieces. The drawing, a smiling sun with stick-figure arms, looked up at no one. The gate was closed, locked from the inside. There were no tire marks on the gravel, no sounds of a car engine, not even a neighbor with a suspicious memory. Emily Sanderson, age 8, had vanished. The police arrived fast. Too fast, it seemed to Danielle, as if someone had already known something would go wrong. She remembered noticing that first officer barely looked around. He asked her to stay calm. He asked her to repeat herself. He asked Caleb if he saw anything. Caleb was 5 and confused. He said he saw a lady in a blue dress. He said the lady whispered something to Emily. Then he said Emily floated into the air. He was told not to say that again. An officer knelt and told Caleb that sometimes, when we're scared, we make things up. Danielle didn't make anything up. She knew what she saw. Nothing. That was the most terrifying part. Emily had been right there. Then she was not. Neighbors helped, volunteers combed the streets, the creek behind the house, the old storm drains that lined the block. Nothing. A week later, the posters were up. A month later, a candlelight vigil. 6 months in, there were theories. Someone said a truck had passed by with a tarp flapping loose. Someone said an old boyfriend of Danielle's used to drive a blue sedan. Someone said nothing at all. The news stations picked up the story for about 2 days. A cute missing girl in a small town made for a quick emotional segment before the next crime, the next scandal, the next election cycle. People lit candles, then forgot to blow them out. Danielle stopped working. Michael picked up more hours. Caleb started talking less. The rooms in the house stayed the same, except Emily's, which was kept locked after the 3rd week. Not to preserve it, but because it hurt to look inside. Toys on the bed, books with corners turned down, drawings taped to the wall. A blue ribbon with a spelling bee medal, the 2nd place one. Danielle used to think 2nd place medals were silly. Now she stared at it like it was a headstone. 12 months after the disappearance, a detective named Warren Price took over the cold file. He had sharp eyes and a slow voice. He didn't promise anything, which Danielle oddly found comforting. He asked about the Nober's first neighbor. He asked again about the lock on the gate. He requested the street footage from the convenience store at the corner of Hickory and Halsey. That was the first real surprise. The footage was gone. The store manager said it had been wiped the day after the disappearance. Not unusual, he said. Cameras loop and delete, but not that one. That one stored footage for 30 days. Price checked the logs. The drive had been disconnected manually. Danielle didn't know what to think. Price did. He thought someone wanted that footage gone. But it wasn't enough to accuse anyone. Not yet. Caleb, by then 6, started drawing pictures. They were mostly of the yard, the same scene over and over. A chalk sun, a small girl with curly hair, and a lady in a long blue dress. Always at the edge of the picture, never in the center. Price asked if Caleb remembered anything else. Caleb said no, but one day he drew something different. The gate open, the chalk scattered, the sun crying. She hid it in her purse like a secret prayer. 2 years in, Michael moved into the guest room. Danielle didn't ask why. She knew. They were 2 people trying to hold up a house that had already collapsed. The walls still stood. The warmth was gone. Every night, Danielle would press her fingers to Emily's last school photo. Every night she would fall asleep listening for a laugh that wouldn't come. Caleb once told her he dreamed of Emily. She lived under a tree in a place where the sky was always pink. Danielle nodded. She let him believe it. It was kinder than the truth. The town slowly forgot. New families moved in. The yard got quiet. On the 13th birthday Emily never had, Danielle sat alone on the porch and watched the wind push dust over the old chalk lines, still faint on the sidewalk. The drawing was gone. The sun had long faded, but one small curve of blue, barely visible under the dirt, made her heart stop. It hadn't been there before. She scraped at it. A petal. Not chalk. Fabric. Blue. Danielle turned it over. It looked like it had been ripped, like it had belonged to a dress. She gave it to Price. He looked at it under a magnifier and said nothing. Then he checked the weather records. On the day Emily disappeared, it hadn't rained, but the week before it had overflowed. The storm drains had overflowed. Price pulled the old blueprints of the neighborhood. He traced a line from the backyard to a tunnel behind the elementary school. An old maintenance drain, covered now, supposedly unused. But no one had ever checked it. Until now. They brought a team. Flashlights, drones, snakes with cameras. It took hours. But halfway down, wedged between rust and brick, they found a small object. A shoe. Scuffed, dirty, but still intact. A child's shoe. Price held it carefully. Inside on the sole, written in fading marker, Emily S. Danielle didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply sat down. The air felt hollow, not because she had hope, but because she didn't know what to feel. A shoe meant nothing, and it meant everything. She had waited years for a sign, and now she had one. But signs didn't talk. Shoes didn't explain. Answers had always been harder than silence. They tested the fabric, Emily's DNA. The shoe, too, confirmed. It was hers. But no body, no bones, no finality. Just proof that Emily had passed through that drain. Somehow. When? Why? With who? That was the question. That was where the story began again, not where it ended. The discovery of the shoe should have brought clarity, but it only thickened the air around the Sanderson family. The house on Hickory Street, once the epicenter of community sympathy, had become a place neighbors walked past more quickly now. The reappearance of the shoe opened more wounds than it closed, and the speculation began again, but this time quieter, more invasive, and far more cruel. People whispered that maybe Emily had run away. Others suggested something more sinister inside the home. Danielle stopped going to the grocery store. Caleb, now 13, walked to school with his head down, his headphones in, pretending not to hear the renewed whispers that followed him like shadows. Michael took extra shifts at the yard, sometimes sleeping in his truck to avoid the silence of home. What once felt like shared grief had turned into something corrosive. Detective Warren Price returned with renewed determination. The lab had confirmed that the shoe bore traces of plant debris uncommon in suburban storm drains. A specific moss, known to grow near untreated concrete infrastructure, was clinging to the sole. It narrowed the location. The storm drain behind the elementary school fed into a system of tunnels constructed during the 1940s for wartime evacuation drills, most of them now sealed or forgotten. Price pulled blueprints again, following the outdated routes marked with dashed lines and faded symbols. He assembled a team from the city's utility department, requesting permission to access the closed sections. A drone was sent further down the line, its camera transmitting grainy footage of decaying walls, old graffiti, and a set of handprints smeared in dirt. One of them, unmistakably, belonged to a child. Inside the house, Danielle began revisiting Emily's things. She took out the box she had once buried at the back of her closet. It contained the last sweater Emily wore, her hairbrush, a broken watch she had insisted on wearing, although it never worked. Danielle did not look at them for long. She simply pressed her fingers against the fabric, feeling the outline of memory, unsure whether to hope or mourn. Caleb, watching his mother from the hallway, said nothing. He had grown quieter in the years since Emily vanished. His eyes held a weight too old for his face. That night, he took out one of his old sketchbooks. He opened to a blank page and drew something he hadn't dared to draw before. It was the woman in blue. This time he added more detail. The necklace she wore, the way her hand curled as she reached out. He remembered something else, too. The way she spoke. It wasn't a whisper, not really. It was calm, too calm, like she had done it before. Danielle noticed the sketch the next morning. She asked if he had remembered anything new. Caleb hesitated. Then he nodded. He said the woman had told Emily they were going on a secret adventure. That was the part he had never told anyone before. Danielle asked why he waited. Caleb answered that the woman said Emily would be gone forever if he told. And for a long time he believed her. Danielle felt a coldness creep up her spine. She called Price. When he arrived, Caleb repeated the memory. Price listened, his expression unreadable. Then he asked a question no one had asked before. Did the woman look familiar? Caleb stared at the drawing, then slowly nodded. She wore something around her neck, something silver. It looked like a locket. Danielle blinked hard. Her sister Monica had a silver locket she never took off. She had moved to Oregon 2 weeks after Emily vanished. She said she needed a change of scenery. Danielle had believed her. She had wanted to believe her. But now the timelines itched at the edges of her mind. Price followed the thread. Monica hadn't kept in close contact. Her calls had grown less frequent over the years. Danielle, in her grief, hadn't pushed for more. Now she wished she had. Price requested her address. She lived outside Eugene, in a rented cabin near the edge of the forest. He made the call to local authorities there, asking for a welfare check. It took 2 days. The cabin was empty. The landlord said she had left suddenly, months ago, not paying the last rent. She had taken nothing but clothes. Her belongings, a few books and framed photos, were still in a box under the porch. Price had them sent to him. Inside one of the photo frames, beneath the paper backing, was a drawing. A child's drawing. A chalk sun, a stick figure girl, and beside her, a woman in blue. The photo's metadata showed it was taken 12 years ago. Price brought it to Danielle. She stared at it for a long time. It was Emily's style, no doubt. The colors were faded, but the sun had the same swirl pattern she used to draw. The stick figure had curly hair, the same loops she always gave herself. Price took the photo to the lab. They confirmed Emily's fingerprints on the back of the paper. The drawing had traveled. It had not stayed buried. Danielle asked Price if he thought her sister had taken Emily. Price didn't answer directly. He said someone had gone to great lengths to erase Emily's trail, someone who knew how to keep a child quiet, someone who had a reason to run. At school, Caleb faced new questions. Rumors spread fast. That his aunt was a kidnapper, that Emily was alive, that she was part of something bigger. The faculty counselor called Danielle. She asked for permission to speak to Caleb about trauma. Danielle agreed. Caleb said he didn't mind. He was tired of holding things in. He remembered another detail, that the woman had told Emily to bring her favorite shoes, ones with the rainbow laces, the ones found in the drain. The memory hit Danielle like a wave. Emily had cried when she couldn't find those shoes that morning. Danielle had helped her lace them. That meant Emily had left willingly. That meant someone had lured her out. Price returned to the tunnel entrance with a new lead. He had found traces of another shoe nearby, not Emily's size, adult. It had been pressed into the mud and forgotten. The print was degraded, but it pointed in the same direction as the drag marks found later along the tunnel's edge. Someone had carried her part way, then walked out alone. A new theory took shape. Emily had followed someone she trusted. Then something went wrong, or something had been planned. Either way, the person didn't want her found. Until now, the case had been a mystery of absence. Now, it was becoming a map of intent. Returned. News vans parked along Hickory Street. Cameras pointed at the Sanderson house again. Old interviews were re-aired. Danielle refused to speak this time. She didn't want to be quoted. She didn't want to explain her sister's absence. Michael declined too. He said his daughter deserved truth, not headlines. Caleb went to school under escort. His classmates stared. Some apologized, others didn't. Rumors outpaced facts. But the pressure mounted. Somewhere, someone knew more. Someone had helped. Someone had seen something, and someone was still watching. Detective Warren Price sat alone in his office 2 days after the tunnel discovery, staring at the grainy Polaroid from Monica's cabin. His desk was now covered in overlapping reports, half-filled legal pads, and hand-drawn maps of the neighborhood's underground grid. The discovery of Emily's drawing had renewed a nationwide interest in the case. and dozens of self-claimed experts flooded the hotline with supposed leads. But one call stood out. It came from a man in Florida who claimed he had once housed a girl named Emily, taken her in without knowing her full name, and only realized the truth after seeing her face on the news. The caller, identified as Dean Holloway, said the girl stayed with him for 2 months, back in 2016, under the name Claire. He provided details about her behaviors, quirks, and habits that matched Emily's early childhood records. She liked to sort her cereal by color, refused to wear socks with holes, and recited a strange rhyme before bed. Price took the call seriously. Too many coincidences lined up, and the pressure to follow every credible lead was now insurmountable. Holloway was placed under surveillance while Price flew out with 2 agents to conduct a formal interview. Arrival at Holloway's weathered home outside Tampa, the detectives found no sign of a young woman matching Emily's age or description. The house was unkempt, with stacks of newspapers lining the walls and the sour smell of mildew and sweat hanging in the air. Holloway, a man in his early 60s, appeared eager but disjointed, his speech drifting between clarity and delusion. He insisted the girl had lived with him and even offered a name, Claire Summers. He claimed she had escaped an abusive foster situation and that he had simply offered her refuge. When asked why he never reported her, Holloway said he thought she was hiding from something worse. Price pressed for details. He asked for photographs, clothing, anything tangible. Holloway brought out an old backpack with the name Claire stitched inside and a journal filled with erratic scribbles. No photos of the girl existed. The agents ran DNA on the toothbrush and hair strands found in the bag, while Price flew back to coordinate with Danielle. When the results returned 3 days later, they brought disappointment. DDM did not match Emily. The girl named Claire had been someone else, supposedly real, possibly imagined. Holloway's account began to unravel under closer inspection. His mental state was fragile, his motives uncertain. He had seen Emily's face in the news and attached it to his own fractured memories. Price was forced to mark the name Claire lingered in his mind. It was the same name found in Monica's photos. He wondered if it had been chosen by Emily herself, or given to her by someone else. Either way, it was not an accidental link. Meanwhile, back in Hickory Street, the damage of renewed attention took a deeper toll. Danielle was receiving letters again. Some were kind, filled with prayers and candles and hope. Others were not. One anonymous letter accused her of knowing more than she let on, implying that her grief was performance. Another suggested she had orchestrated the disappearance for sympathy. Michael confronted a man at the gas station who made a joke under his breath. Caleb's school counselor recommended home instruction for the next month, citing emotional fatigue. Danielle agreed. The house grew quieter still. Price returned to go over old evidence again. He unearthed a report filed in the early days of the case, barely noticed before. It was a tip called in by a teenage girl who had seen someone matching Emily's description near the edge of a rest stop 30 miles away, 3 days after the disappearance. The officer at the time dismissed it, citing lack of details. Price tracked the girl down, now 22, living in another state. She confirmed the memory. She had always believed it was Emily. She remembered the way the girl held her arm tightly, like it hurt. She remembered the woman who pulled her away. Not a mother, something colder. She described a tall woman with a blue scarf tied around her wrist and silver bracelets that jingled when she moved. Price matched that detail to Monica's known jewelry style. A pattern was forming. Price contacted the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit for help reconstructing a timeline. Together, they cross-referenced missing child cases with known aliases tied to Monica's banking and travel history. A clearer map began to form. Monica had used at least 4 identities in the past decade. Her movements followed a strange rhythm, staying no more than a year in any town, always in isolated rental schools or youth shelters, each location correlated with a child welfare report of a missing or runaway girl between the ages of 8 and 12. The agents labeled her a possible serial non-cuscopial abductor. Price was granted permission to escalate the investigation to a national warrant. The focus shifted from recovering Emily to tracking Monica down before she disappeared again. As the investigation expanded, another surprise surfaced. A retired city worker named Earl Duggan came forward after seeing Price on a televised press conference. He claimed he had been part of the original storm drain maintenance team back in the late 90s and remembered sealing off one of the smaller tunnels due to structural damage. He recalled a woman asking detailed questions about the blueprints months before Emily disappeared. He had assumed she was a city planner. She had used a fake badge and a clipboard. When shown a photo of Monica, Duggan recognized her immediately. She had asked about access points, escape routes, and even requested old schematics. It now seemed likely that Monica had mapped out her plan long before she acted. Price ordered a new search of the tunnel system using advanced imaging tools. Deep thermal scans revealed a hidden chamber beneath an abandoned pump house, accessible only through a crawl space masked by a collapsed wall. It took 2 days to break through. Inside they found old food wrappers, torn blankets, a child's drawing nailed to the concrete. This one was darker, a figure with red eyes standing over a girl who sat on the floor with her knees tucked to her chest. The words, "No more hiding," were scrawled in uneven lettering along the top. Price knew they were close. Danielle was called in to identify the items. She recognized the drawing style as Emily's, but the tone made her sick. Caleb asked to see it. He stared at it for minutes without blinking. Then he said something Price didn't expect. He had seen that figure before, in a dream. Price noted the pattern. Children don't invent what they haven't seen. The mind reshapes what it fears into. That meant Emily had been held in that chamber, and not alone. 3 days after the hidden chamber was discovered beneath the abandoned pump house, Caleb stood in the hallway outside his mother's bedroom, holding the drawing they had found in the underground space. He hadn't slept much since seeing it. Something in the image disturbed him, not only because of what it showed, but because it echoed a memory he had buried years ago. At the time of Emily's disappearance, Caleb had been 5, and everyone around him had assumed his recollection was unreliable. He had mentioned a woman in blue and the idea that Emily floated into the air, and they had dismissed it as the confusion of a frightened child. But now, at 15, he felt the weight of a memory returning not in pieces, but in full. He waited until his mother left the house to visit the detective's office, then sat alone in Emily's room, untouched for over a decade, where the dust settled over toys and dolls like a quiet shroud. The air smelled faintly of old fabric and something unspoken. Caleb sat cross-legged on the bed and closed his eyes, letting the memory come. That day in the yard, he had been playing with his figures near the window when he saw her. A woman in blue, just like he said. She didn't knock. She didn't climb the fence. She was just there, standing on the other side, smiling. Emily ran to the gate. Caleb remembered feeling a strange sensation in his chest, like something cold had crept into his ribs. The woman spoke to Emily for a while. Then she leaned down and took something from her purse. A necklace, a silver blanket. She handed it to Emily through the bars. That was when the gate opened. Caleb knew it had been locked, but it opened anyway, and he couldn't understand how. Emily stepped through, and the woman took her hand. They walked off together, slowly, like there was no urgency at all. He wanted to yell. He wanted to scream for his mother, but the woman looked back once, and her eyes met his through the window, and in that moment, he froze. He felt small and powerless and deeply afraid. For years, he thought he had imagined that moment, but now, with every new discovery, he was certain it had been real. Later that evening, he told his mother everything. Danielle sat across from him at the kitchen table, listening without interruption. Her face stayed still, but her hand trembled slightly on the edge of her mug. When he finished, she didn't ask why he hadn't told them before. She already knew. No one had wanted to believe a child's voice when they were desperate for adult answers. Caleb asked if she blamed him. She reached across the table and took his hand. Neither spoke after that. The next morning, Danielle called Detective Price and relayed Caleb's account. Price listened carefully. The detail about the locket matched the photo from Monica's cabin and the testimony of the witness from the rest stop. That specific accessory had surfaced in every credible sighting. Price began to focus more closely on Monica's movement records. A financial report flagged a car rental made under one of her aliases in Texas, dated 5 months after Emily disappeared. Surveillance footage from the rental agency showed a woman with a young girl beside her. The footage was low resolution, but Price enhanced it through digital analysis. Danielle confirmed they were the same pair Emily had received for her birthday. The car was a gray sedan, rented for 7 days and returned with an additional 87 miles on the odometer. Cross-referencing fuel receipts and nearby road cameras, Price traced the journey to a remote wooded area bordering state land. A satellite scan of the terrain revealed an abandoned ranger station, long since removed from public record. He assembled a team to investigate. Inside the structure, they found no signs of life, but scattered belongings indicated it had been used for shelter. A torn mattress, empty cans of preserved food, a single pillowcase embroidered with the letter E, and a cracked handheld mirror were all logged and analyzed. Forensics confirmed a partial fingerprint on the mirror belonging to Emily Sanderson. She had been there. The scene suggested temporary habitation rather than permanent captivity. Emily had moved, possibly frequently. Monica had known how to stay ahead. With this discovery, the narrative shifted once more. Emily had not been hidden in one place, but likely relocated often, keeping her isolated and difficult to trace. Price contacted the Monica had employed coercive bonding techniques, convincing Emily that her family had abandoned her, or that she was no longer safe returning home. Psychological manipulation over years could erode a child's identity, especially starting at such a young age. The name Claire may not have been randomly chosen. It may have been forced on her to create separation from her past. Caleb struggled with the revelation. He started attending therapy sessions offered by a trauma specialist who had worked with recovered abductees. He spoke openly for the first time about the guilt that had haunted him for a decade. His nightmares returned, but they carried less fear and more clarity. He described the feeling of being watched for months after Emily vanished, how he once thought he saw the woman in blue at a market but convinced himself it was imagination. Danielle kept the household quiet during this time, limiting visitors and unplugging the phone each night. Michael, still working long shifts, began sleeping at home again. He and Danielle spoke in low tones at night, sharing new pieces of a puzzle they had spent years avoiding. They stopped trying to guess what Emily had become. Instead, they focused on finding her. News coverage grew quieter again, but the investigation didn't. Price's team analyzed property rentals under all Monica's aliases. One cabin in Arizona stood out. It had been leased under the name Elaine Monroe, with a child listed as a dependent named Claire. The cabin had since been rented to another tenant, but the landlord kept detailed records. One letter bore no return address, addressed only to E. Price obtained a warrant to open it. Inside was a folded piece of yellow paper, handwritten in uneven lines. It read, "I don't know where to send this, but I remember the fence, the sidewalk, the sun, the chalk. Please tell Caleb I still have the locket. I didn't forget." No name was signed, but Price believed it to be from Emily. The handwriting was consistent with her childhood samples, only altered slightly by time. Danielle wept when she read it. Caleb held it to his chest. It was the first real communication in over a decade. Price now knew Emily was alive. The letter's tone was cautious, distant, but it confirmed memory. It confirmed identity. And it confirmed the possibility that Emily had been aware of her past all along, or at least fragments of it. Price issued a new statement to national databases. Emily Sanderson, also known as Claire, was officially declared missing and possibly endangered, but alive. He believed Monica was no longer alone. Surveillance teams were dispatched to watch known drop boxes and mailing locations previously used by Monica. Every lead mattered now. The end was not yet near, but it was visible. The confirmation that Emily was alive reignited not only the investigation, but the emotions that had long hardened inside the Sanderson family. The letter, mailed from Arizona, had transformed a distant memory into a breathing reality. For the first time in over a decade, Danielle allowed herself to imagine her daughter not just as a frozen image in a school photo, but as someone still walking the earth, someone who had been writing, remembering, and trying to reach home in her own silent way. Detective Price knew that the significance of the letter extended beyond its words. It meant Emily had access to a mailbox. It meant she had either learned to function independently or was being allowed limited freedom. And it meant Monica's control was no longer absolute. With the behavioral analysis unit's help, Price refined the psychological profile of Monica Canfield. She was now considered a nonviolent abductor who employed manipulation instead of force. Isolating the children she took through constant relocation, new identities, and emotional rewiring. Emily had become Claire by necessity, not choice. Her ability to recall her past and Monica's constructed world, Price theorized that Emily was entering an age where her natural independence and cognitive maturity were starting to overpower the years of mental conditioning. It was a turning point. Either Monica would tighten her grip or Emily would run. Caleb, still holding on to the letter, began to look through his childhood notebooks again. In the days after Emily disappeared, he had drawn obsessively, often repeating symbols or scenes. He had never understood why. Now he noticed something new. In one drawing, Emily stood at the edge of a drain tunnel. Behind her was the sun, and in front of her were 3 steps and a shadow. Danielle stared at the image and pointed out something he had missed. The drain had markings, numbers. Caleb hadn't remembered drawing them, but they were there. 3 digits, 104. Price had the image scanned and enlarged. The numbers matched a utility code assigned to one of the oldest storm drains in the county, one that had not been included in previous search operations because it had been decommissioned before the city expanded. It was located behind an abandoned cement facility 22 miles north of Hickory Street. Price assembled a team with full clearance and ground-penetrating radar. They arrived at the facility at dawn, the sky still heavy with mist, and the silence only broken by the crunch of boots on gravel. The entrance to the tunnel was half buried under rusted equipment and collapsed fencing. They cleared the debris slowly and methodically, finally revealing a rusted metal hatch with the faded digits 104 still barely visible under layers of grime. The tunnel was tight and partially flooded. It reeked of mildew and age. The temperature dropped as they advanced, their light slicing through decades of darkness. Roughly 30 feet in, they found the first sign. A small wooden sign, half snapped, lay against the wall. Someone had painted on it, with childlike strokes. It read simply, "Not far." 50 feet in, they reached a fork. The left side had collapsed, but the right continued. They followed it for another 200 feet before reaching a wider chamber where the air felt strangely still. On the floor sat a pair of shoes, children's size, worn down at the heels, with faded rainbow laces still tied neatly. The same kind Emily had worn on the day she vanished. Next to them lay a faded photograph in a plastic sleeve. It showed a younger Emily, her arms wrapped around a stuffed animal, smiling with the unawareness of what would come. There were no footprints nearby, no other items to indicate recent activity, but the message was clear. Someone had placed these items here intentionally. Danielle was called to identify the shoes and the photo. She did not hesitate. The shoes were unmistakably Emily's. She had bought them at a discount store after Emily had begged for the rainbow laces, and she remembered how Emily would tie them carefully, always double cap. The photo had been taken on Emily's 7th birthday, one Danielle remembered clearly because Emily had gotten a cold and stayed in her pajamas the entire day. That image had never been publicly released. It was not one of the photos on missing person posters or the internet. Only someone with access to their private albums could have brought it there. Monica, but why leave it? Why now? Price suspected it was either a message or a trail. Either Monica was showing defiance or Emily was signaling her presence. He examined the area for further clues. Using forensic light scanning, they detected faint fingerprints on the plastic sleeve and partial footprints leading out of the chamber. The prints were incomplete, but the spacing suggested 2 individuals walking in close succession. One adult, one smaller. That meant Emily and Monica had both been here recently. Meanwhile, Danielle began writing her own letter. She wanted to respond. She hoped Emily would try again. She wrote not just to her daughter, but to the version of her that had survived. She told her about the house, how Caleb had grown, how Michael still kept the porch light on every night. She placed the letter in an envelope with no address and gave it to Price, who submitted it to the mail drop surveillance program in hopes that Emily might pick up mail again. Weeks passed. Then another letter came. It arrived at a public library's return box in a small town in Utah, flagged by a local police tip. The writing matched the first. It read, "I remember the smell of crayons. I remember the book with the torn page. I remember Mom's hair when it was wet, and I remember someone saying I wasn't supposed to. That's how I knew it was a lie." Price had the paper tested. The DNA match was conclusive. Emily was not only alive, but she was aware of her past, aware of the deception, and breaking free from it. Caleb read the letter 12 times. He asked if he could write back. Danielle agreed. He wrote 3 pages, telling her everything she had missed. The drawings he had saved, the nights he cried, the sound of her name being whispered in his dreams. He ended it with a message only they would understand. A drawing of 2 stick figures on opposite sides of a gate, with a chalk sun between them. Price arranged for the letter to be scanned and placed in drop boxes at multiple locations Monica had been known to frequent. He didn't know if it would reach her, but he knew Emily was still reaching out, and now they were reaching back. The discovery of the shoes and the second letter from Emily shifted the investigation from pursuit to a race against silence. Detective Price knew now that Emily was not just surviving, but resisting, and every piece of communication she managed to send proved that Monica's hold was weakening. The choice to leave the shoes and the photograph in the storm drain wasn't random. It was intentional, calculated, and symbolic. Emily wanted to be found, but she also wanted to control the terms. Price began coordinating with missing persons units across 4 states, focusing specifically on unsolved cases involving girls between the ages of 7 and 12 who had vanished with no sign of forced entry or family involvement. Patterns emerged quickly. Each disappearance took place within 20 miles of a foster care facility. Each child had been in transitional guardianship. Each report involved a woman known to the system but never suspected, and each had faded from media attention within days. Monica had created a network of erasure, using bureaucracy and chaos to keep her movements clean and her victims invisible. As Danielle and Caleb waited in a space between hope and fear, Price's team traced one of Monica's former rental addresses to a now-demolished farmhouse on the outskirts of a ghost town in Nevada. The land had been sold back to the state, but a storage unit linked to her alias Elaine Monroe remained unclaimed in the county registry. With a court order, Price and 2 agents entered the unit, expecting only discarded belongings or vague traces of her movement. What they found changed the nature of the investigation. Inside the rusted container were boxes marked with children's names. Some were labeled with first initials only. One was marked E.S. Inside were old drawings, a rain-soaked diary, and a lock of brown curly hair taped inside a folded card. On the back of the card were the words, "I stayed with MC. She was nice." That sentence echoed the kind of messaging Monica might have encouraged, a carefully constructed narrative of safety. But it was followed by something darker. Below the line, scrawled in a different pen, were the words, "But I never saw the others again." Price ordered the contents preserved and sent for immediate forensic testing. Among the boxes were Polaroid photographs, not just of Emily, but of at least 5 other children. None of the other faces matched any of the widely distributed missing children from the current list, which meant these children had either been ignored by the system or misclassified as runaways. One photograph showed a girl with a bruised cheek and vacant eyes, standing beside Monica, who wore the same silver necklace identified by Caleb. Another photo was labeled with a date nearly 6 years after Emily's abjection, suggesting that Monica had continued to abduct long after Emily and had likely been training her victims to remain silent through isolation, coercion, and constant relocation. The FBI set up a mobile command unit near the Nevada site, and Price met with behavioral experts to determine how someone like Monica could maintain such a calculated operation alone. The consensus was that she wasn't operating entirely by herself. She may not have had a partner in every location, but her ability to avoid detection for over a decade meant she had developed systems for temporary shelter, cash flow, and psychological control. What they found next deepened the horror. Behind the main unit was a second, smaller storage space rented under a different alias. It contained remnants of a makeshift living area, a cot, some canned food, and a journal that didn't belong to Monica. The handwriting was uneven, anxious, and younger than her own. The entries referred to her as M, but included fragments that matched Emily's earlier writings. One page read, "We slept underground for 2 days. She said the noise above was too dangerous." Another read, "I saw the others, but only for a little while." They didn't talk. They just stared. I asked about the girl with the cut. Em said she went home. I don't think she did. Danielle was not informed of this detail immediately. Price withheld it to avoid psychological collapse. Caleb, however, had already begun asking the question no one wanted to confront. What happened to the other children? Where did they go? And why was Emily the only one leaving clues? Price believed Emily had witnessed the fates of others and had come to understand that escape was not just a personal act, but a moral one. She wasn't just running, she was trying to pull a trail behind her. Each drawing, each letter, and each breadcrumb left in the tunnel system was not only about her identity, but about accountability. She wanted someone to know. Based on the new evidence, the team began re-examining underground infrastructure maps, particularly storm drains and tunnels near Monica's last known locations. An old sewage route that had been closed after a chemical spill in 1989 came into focus. It had been partially buried beneath a series of renovations, but the main shaft still existed beneath a school parking lot in a small Utah town. Price secured permission for excavation. What they uncovered beneath the lot was a cement chamber with steel reinforcements, roughly the size of a small room, with only a single trapdoor leading in. Inside they found 4 discarded shoes, 1 backpack, a broken set of glasses, and a journal page with smudged writing. The words visible were, "I remember the chalk and the smell of wet stone," and "I think I was meant to forget." Each item was photographed and catalogued. DNA results confirmed at least 2 of the items belonged to missing children from Price's database. Emily's handwriting was confirmed on the journal fragment. She had been there. She had survived what others did not. Danielle finally asked the question that haunted her. Why Emily? Why her daughter? What made her different? What allowed her to endure where others had vanished? Caleb thought the answer was simple. Emily had always known she was loved. Even in confusion and fear, she had never fully let go of home. That anchor, however distant, had kept her from collapsing into the fiction Monica tried to build. She had held onto memories, guarded them like treasures, and waited for the day she could use them to find her way back. At this point, the FBI issued a nationwide alert for Monica Canfield under every known alias, categorizing her as a serial child abductor with an active psychological profile and a likelihood of continued movement. Flyers with updated age progression sketches of Emily were distributed across border points, bus stations, shelters, and hospitals. The hope was no longer just about finding Emily. It was now about dismantling the legacy of a woman who had built her life by stealing the lives of others. Price believed Emily was close, not just geographically, but emotionally. The frequency and clarity of her messages suggested she was preparing for something, and that something was either a full escape or a final confrontation. The only question left was whether law enforcement would reach her first, or Monica would vanish again with new shadows in her wake. The weight of the discoveries beneath the town and in the Nevada storage unit changed the narrative from a missing child investigation to something far broader and more sinister. Monica Canfield was no longer just a fugitive abductor who had vanished with a single girl over a decade earlier. She was now being considered the architect of a fragmented and murky pattern of abductions that had evaded public notice for years. Detective Price convened with federal agents and child welfare investigators to identify the full scope of Monica's reach. What they uncovered was not a wide conspiracy, but a quiet system of cracks and oversights she had expertly manipulated. Monica had operated in the margins of official systems, never using the same name twice in the same region, and always renting under secondary aliases while appearing to move with no dependent children on record. She had exploited outdated databases, clerical errors, and overworked county officials to pass through shelters, low-income housing, and unregulated rentals, always just below the threshold of suspicion. Her ability to vanish was not due to brilliance, but to her precise understanding of how bureaucracies failed. Emily's journal fragments became essential. The handwriting, initially hesitant and uneven, grew more structured with each piece recovered. Price arranged for a forensic linguist to review the recovered writings to establish a timeline of emotional evolution. In the early entries, Emily wrote about her confusion, her desire to return home, and her belief that she had done something wrong. But as the pages continued, the tone shifted. She began documenting observations. She noted the names of other children, the locations of temporary shelters, and described the way Monica spoke to them. She referenced aliases, dates, and routines. It became clear that at some point, Emily began preparing to record the truth. She had turned herself into the historian of Monica's hidden world. Based on the names Emily listed, Price began searching for matching missing person reports across several states. He found 4 matches, all girls between the ages of 7 and 11 who had disappeared between 2012 and 2018. Each case had gone cold within weeks. In all 4 cases, the initial response had been underwhelming due to unstable family circumstances, and each child had been labeled a likely runaway. But now, with handwriting samples, photographic evidence, and timelines aligning, Price reopened all 4 investigations under a new classification. He issued formal notices to their families, informing them that their daughters may have been victims of a wider pattern of abduction linked to the Emily Sanderson case. The news devastated the families, reopening old griefs with a surge of bitter hope. One mother flew to the Nevada site to see the storage unit contents for herself. She broke down upon seeing a photograph of her daughter labeled with a date 2 years after her disappearancing, confirming she had still been alive long after the authorities had stopped searching. Price reviewed the map of Monica's previous locations and noted that they formed a loose, irregular loop through rural and economically neglected areas, where housing inspections were rare and community surveillance was minimal. He marked the outliers where Monica had remained longer than a year and cross-referenced those locations with unregulated childcare workers and unlicensed youth housing operations. In one such facility, now shuttered after budget cuts, he found a retired caretaker who remembered a quiet girl named Claire who never spoke to the other children but always carried a worn notebook. She had disappeared one morning and the staff had assumed she ran away. No report had been filed. When shown a photo of Emily from her early years, the caretaker recognized her instantly. This confirmation established yet another link between Emily's route and Monica's movements. Back at the Sanderson home, Danielle and Caleb attempted to preserve a sense of normalcy while also preparing for the moment they had dared not envision for over a decade. They had Emily's handwriting on the wall now, letters tucked carefully into frames, and a growing file of evidence that she had fought for years to remember them. Danielle began keeping a daily journal, recording her thoughts as if writing directly to Emily, believing it might one day serve as a bridge. Caleb started sketching again, but this time with a purpose. He drew the tunnels, the chambers, the clues Emily had left. He said it made him feel closer to her. He also began to remember more clearly the final moments he saw her, the way she turned back before disappearing through the gate, as if she had been waiting for someone to stop her. Then came the most chilling discovery. While analyzing data from Monica's last known rentals, Price found a digital breadcrumb she had left behind on a used laptop recovered from a pawn shop in Utah. A recovered file revealed a spreadsheet titled Safe List. It contained a list of 22 female first names, alongside codes and notations that included what appeared to be abbreviations for states and months. 12 of the names matched known missing person cases. 10 did not. One of the names was Emily, marked with the code C1R. Price theorized this could indicate a classification system, possibly Claire 1, recovered. Other names had codes like D2G or B4H, each followed by what looked like expiration dates. The implications were grim. The spreadsheet suggested a level of documentation and structure that Monica had kept hidden until now. It hinted that she had either traded or relocated children in some systematic way, possibly involving others. But despite the fear this information caused, it also provided a framework for finding the unknown victims. Price presented the spreadsheet to the task force. A specialized data team began building profiles around the unknown names, cross-referencing them with school records, clinic visits, and any incidents involving unregistered guardians. The information was then used to update a heat map of Monica's operational areas. A pattern emerged around a section of mining caves repurposed in the 1,960 SS storm shelters. Locals had reported seeing a woman and a teenager walking near the canyon trails in the past month, but no one thought much of it. Price led a team to the location. They set up surveillance along the surrounding exits and used drones to scan the shallow cave networks. In one of the outer catters, they found signs of recent habitation, extinguished campfires, food wrappers, a handmade calendar with days marked off, and a third letter written in the same handhandler as the previous two. The letter read, "I can't stay long, she's watching again. I tried to send a girl with the short hair, but she didn't make it far. I know the way out now. If you get this, follow the red marks. I'll leave them where the ground is soft. Tell Caleb I never forgot the yard. Never forgot the chalk sun." Price analyzed the area and quickly found a series of red chalk arrows etched onto stone and dirt, pointing toward a trail leading away from the canyon base. The marks were faint but deliberate. They followed a narrow, steep path out of the gorge and into the forest beyond. Price sent a unit ahead to trace the path while notifying Danielle and Caleb that Emily had left a trail in real time. The urgency was now at its peak. The girl who had vanished was not just trying to escape, she was trying to lead them to freedom, to herself, and perhaps to the others still lost in the shadows Monica left behind. The red chalk arrows marked a path through the undergrowth that led away from the main canyon and into a region of dense pine forest, where light filtered down in narrow beams and the ground was soft from recent rain. Detective Price followed the trail personally, his eyes sweeping left to right for signs of broken branches or disturbed soil, while his team moved carefully behind him. The chalk marks grew fainter the farther they went, as if Emily had been running low on time or space, or simply fear had caught up to her and forced her to abandon subtlety. After nearly an hour of careful movement, the team reached a clearing where a rusted camper sat half-hidden behind a curtain of trees. A small line of smoke curled from a makeshift chimney that had been fashioned out of pipe segments, and footprints surrounded the perimeter, recent and hurt. The agent with the drone confirmed a heat signature inside. Price signaled for silence, and two agents flanked the structure while another moved to cover the rear. As Price approached the door, the world seemed to hold its breath. Inside the camper, they found no signs of violence. The air was stale but not foul. There were two sleeping bags on the floor, one child and one adult. A backpack rested near the door, half unzipped, revealing cans of food, a hairbrush, and a book with its cover torn off. On the table lay a single sheet of lined paper with handwriting that matched the previous letters. It read, "I waited too long." She moved us again. "But I left this so you would know. I saw the map. I marked the next place. Tell Caleb not to follow. Tell him to wait." "I will come." Price held the note in his gloved hands and examined the room. There were no red markings here, no trail to follow immediately, but the mention of a map offered hope. One agent found it tucked behind a vent, folded tightly and partially damp. On it were 5 red circles drawn in. One had a line through it, indicating the now abandoned cave site. Another was circled twice. It was a town called Bishop's Pass, a small community just over the border with fewer than 300 residents, and known primarily for its quiet isolation. Price coordinated with state police and set up quiet observation around the perimeter of Bishop's Pass, hoping to catch sight of the woman and the girl. Surveillance teams were dispatched to gas stations, clinics, and general stores, while unmarked vehicles patrolled residential zones without drawing attention. 2 days passed with no movement. Then, on the morning of the 3rd day, a woman matching Monica Canfield's description entered a pharmacy in the center of town. She wore dark glasses and a headscarf and asked for a motion sickness remedy while holding the hand of a teenager with curly hair. The pharmacist, later interviewed by Price, described the girl as quiet but alert, eyes moving constantly around the store as if memorizing escape routes. She did not speak, but when the pharmacist asked if she felt sick, she nodded once. They paid in cash and left on foot, heading north along the edge of town. Price reviewed the surveillance footage and had the images enhanced. The timestamp on the footage placed their presence in Bishop's Pass just 20 minutes before the pharmacy visit, but by the time officers arrived on foot, the trail had gone cold again. However, this time they found something different, a small piece of string tied to a fence post at the edge of a public park. It had been dyed red, likely with marker or lipstick. Price examined the area carefully and spotted the faintest impression of a footprint in the soft grass behind the fence. They were still leaving signs, just harder to find now. The pattern suggested Emily was deliberately trying to lead the search party without alerting Monica. The distance between signals was increasing, but so was the content. Price believed that Emily knew they were close and was trying to push the timing in their favor. The team refocused their efforts on all 5 marked locations on the map. 4 of them were in rural towns within a 2-hour radius. The 5th was farther, positioned near the edge of a river known for camping and low-cost trailer rentals. Price suspected the next move would be toward that final mark. The day before the team planned to move on the last location, something unexpected occurred. A call came through from a woman who claimed she had seen the girl from the wanted posters. She worked the night shift at a diner on the outskirts of a county road and said a woman in a blue dress had come in with a teenager who looked exactly like the photo of Emily. The woman paid in cash, kept her sunglasses on the entire time, and sat facing the door. The girl ordered nothing, only drank water. When the woman got up to pay, the girl stood slowly and dropped something under the table. The waitress found it after they left. It was a piece of napkin folded into a triangle with a name and number scribbled inside. Caleb's name. The number was Danielle's. Danielle was contacted and asked if she recognized the handwriting. She did. It was Emily's. It was rushed and uneven, but it was hers. The significance was enormous. It meant Emily not only remembered their names, but was actively trying to reach them despite Monica's presence. It meant Emily had written down the only contact information she trusted and found a way to leave it behind, knowing it might be picked up. It was both a cry for help and a signal of resilience. The FBI initiated a lockdown of all public transit locations within 50 miles of the diner and distributed updated alerts to nearby towns. Price took a small unit and moved toward the final marked location on the map, a trailer park along the river with 10 units and limited cell service. The owner confirmed that a woman and a girl matching their description had checked in 2 nights ago using fake names and had paid for 3 days in cash. They were in Lot 6. Price moved in just after sunrise. They surrounded the trailer quietly and then, with a nod, knocked on the door. A pause followed, then footsteps. A voice asked who it was. Price responded calmly, using Monica's assumed alias to draw her attention. The door opened 2 inches, then slammed shut. Within seconds, they heard a crash at the back. Officers circled and caught Monica trying to flee through the rear window, her legs tangled in a sheet and her eyes wild with confusion. She was restrained without a fight. Inside the trailer, they found Emily standing still near the bed, her hands at her sides, her expression unreadable. She looked at the officers, then at Price, then at the floor. Danielle and Caleb were notified within the hour. They were already on their way. Emily stood still in the center of the trailer as officers moved carefully around her, avoiding sudden movements, treating the air between them like a delicate thread that might snap at any moment. Her clothes were clean but mismatched, her hair tied in a low braid that looked recently done, and her eyes, though wide and watchful, betrayed no fear, only a kind of distant caution. She did not speak when they first asked her name. She simply nodded when they said it aloud. Emily. The sound seemed to reach her, but it did not pull her all the way in. She allowed them to lead her to a transport vehicle without protest, sitting quietly in the back seat with her hands folded over a notebook she refused to let go. Monica was taken in a separate car, her expression unpenetrable and her silence impenetrable. He glanced once at the notebook, she noticed, and after a pause handed it to him. Inside were pages of dense handwriting, most of it addressed not to herself, but to someone else. It was not a diary, it was a record, a document of where she had been, who she had seen, what she had remembered, and what she had chosen not to forget. The last page had one line written at the top. Tell them I tried. Tell them I never stopped trying. She then took the notebook back and closed it, returning to silence. At the intake center, medical staff evaluated her condition. She was underweight, but otherwise healthy. She had no visible bruises or injuries. Her reflexes were normal. Her responses, though minimal, showed understanding. She answered yes or no when asked direct questions, but her voice was low and careful, as if still testing whether it was safe to speak in full sentences. She did not ask where Monica had been taken, nor did she inquire about what would happen next. She simply waited. Danielle and Caleb arrived later that afternoon. They were brought into a side room where counselors prepared them for what they might face. The reunion would not be easy. Emily might not remember everything. She might not want to talk. She might not even be ready to accept that the world she once knew still existed. When the door opened and she stepped into the room, Danielle froze. Caleb stood beside her, taller than she remembered, his shoulders squared and his eyes already wet. Emily looked at them both, then at the floor. Danielle moved slowly, stopping a few feet away. She said her name once, gently. Emily looked up. There was no rush forward, no tearful embrace, only a long, quiet moment where three people stood in a room filled with everything that had been lost. Emily blinked slowly, then nodded. Caleb was the first to reach out. He held her hand lightly, not gripping it, just enough to let her feel that he was there. She didn't pull away. The reunion was not a conclusion. It was a beginning. Emily was placed into a recovery program with trauma specialists, psychologists, and a small circle of trusted caregivers. She was not immediately returned home, as the risk of overwhelming her was high. Instead, Danielle and Caleb visited daily, reading slowly, reading books aloud, showing her old photos, letting her set the pace. Emily responded with cautious steps forward. She spoke more each day, revealed fragments of memory, described places and moments that aligned with known details. One morning, she told Danielle about a riverbank where they had once sat and fed ducks. Danielle remembered that day. It was the last birthday before Emily disappeared. The recognition brought tears, but Emily did not cry. She simply asked what happened to the ducks. Danielle said she didn't know. Emily said she hoped they found the water. Meanwhile, Monica was processed through federal custody and charged with multiple counts of child abduction, endangerment, and identity fraud. Her silence remained intact during initial interviews, and when finally brought into court for arraignment, she spoke only to confirm her name. Her defense team requested psychiatric evaluation, citing years of undiagnosed trauma and delusional disorder. The court granted the motion, but Price remained unconvinced that insanity had driven Monica's choices. He believed it was something colder, a calculated response to perceived injustice, a personal ideology that had allowed her to rationalize taking children she believed needed saving. Emily's writings supported this theory. In one entry, she described Monica telling her that families were dangerous, that forgetting them was the only way to survive, that forgetting them meant becoming someone new. Emily had written beneath that passage in firmer strokes, "I never became someone new, I just remembered quieter." Months passed. Emily's health improved, her appetite returned. She asked for books, she asked for puzzles. She began drawing again, not tunnels this time, but open skies, lakes, trees. When asked if she wanted to go home, she said not yet. Caleb brought her a drawing he made of their old yard, with the chalk sun and the gate closed. Emily stared at it for a long time. Then she drew her own version, the same gate, but open, and the sun with a path leading out of the frame. Then came the final letter. It was found tucked into the back pocket of the notebook she had carried with her from the trailer. Price discovered it while filing the materials into evidence and immediately knew it had not been addressed to law enforcement. It had been written for her family, perhaps for herself, perhaps for them to find only when she was ready. It read, in full, "I remember the fence. I remember the chalk. I remember thinking if I turned around, someone would call me back. No one did. I didn't blame them. I was scared. I thought maybe I did something wrong. She told me forgetting was easier, but I didn't forget. I carried the sound of your voices like a lantern. Some nights it flickered, some nights it went dark, but I always found it again. I watched the seasons change behind motel curtains. I learned to cook in silence. I learned to lie well enough to survive. I looked at maps and drew doors on the walls. I left pieces because I believed someone was still looking. I thought it would be harder to come back, but maybe I was never as far as I thought. I don't know if I'm ready, but I know I'm not lost anymore." Danielle read the letter 3 times before saying anything. She handed it to Caleb, who read it once, then folded it carefully and placed it in the family photo album, behind the last picture they had of Emily before she vanished. Price requested permission to include the letter in the case file. Danielle agreed, but only after making a copy. She wanted the original to stay with them. A symbol, not of pain, but of the truth that their daughter had not disappeared completely. She had been writing her way back the entire time. The return of Emily Sanderson did not arrive with headlines or parades or the kind of sweeping closure that television shows promise. It arrived in moments. In a quiet Sunday morning where the porch light was finally turned off. In a dinner where Emily sat at the table and asked for more potatoes. In a small laugh shared between siblings over a memory that had not been spoken aloud in years. In a small afternoon where she stood at the doorway of her old room and walked inside on her own. Healing, as they discovered, was not a straight line or a destination. It was a collection of choices made every day, some large and conscious, others so subtle they barely seemed like decisions at all. Danielle learned to listen without expecting certain words. Caleb learned to wait without needing answers. Michael, who had once buried himself in shifts and silence, now rose early to brew tea and leave small notes on the counter, hoping his daughter would read them before he left for work. Emily's recovery was a private revolution, not defined by the speed of her progress, but by the strength of her persistence. Her world had been reduced for years to the confines of borrowed rooms, controlled voices, and the illusion of safety painted over fear. Reclaiming her name meant more than speaking it aloud. It meant unlearning what she had been told to believe about herself. It meant returning to a self she had protected in the silence of her mind, even when no one else could see it. The therapist never pushed her to recount everything. They encouraged her to set her own boundaries. What she did share came in layers. She described the sound of car tires on gravel outside motel rooms and the way Monica would change her name at every new address. She described how Monica told her family had given up, how she was special because she had been chosen. She said she wanted to believe it because the truth felt heavier. She admitted that when she saw her mother again, part of her was afraid it would be a trick. But when Danielle spoke her name and waited without reaching, that fear had started to fade. Emily began volunteering at a local shelter for women and children 6 months after her return. She didn't explain why. She just asked to go. There she helped organize books, pack clothes, and refill snack drawers. One day she returned home with a small bracelet a younger girl had made for her, strung with plastic beads spelling out the word brave. She placed it in the center of her bedroom desk and said nothing. Caleb found her sketching again, not tunnels or maps, but scenes from memory. Their old yard, a faded chalk sun, a swing set from a park they had visited before she disappeared. One evening, she handed him a drawing of a girl standing in the rain, holding a paper lantern. Caleb asked if the girl was lost. Emily said no. She said the girl was learning how to walk in the dark without fear. When she smiled after saying that, Caleb understood that his sister had never truly vanished. She had just learned how to live behind a different door. That spring, Danielle was asked to speak at a conference for families of missing children. She hesitated at first, unsure of what she could possibly offer, but Emily told her to go. Danielle shared their story not as a finished journey, but as an evolving one. She said that sometimes the search is not only about locating a body or proving a crime, but about waiting long enough for the light in someone to return. She said there is no handbook for rebuilding what was broken, but there is still hope in hands held quietly and doors left open. Just in case, she spoke about forgiveness, not of the one who had stolen her child, but of the space inside herself where guilt had lived for years. She said healing is not about forgetting, it is about remembering and choosing to live anyway. Monica Canfield was sentenced to multiple life terms without parole after a federal trial revealed the extent of her actions. Over the course of the proceedings, more children were identified. Some had made it out, others had not. Families from across states came forward to claim belongings recovered from storage units and abandoned properties. The full count of her victims remained uncertain, but each name added to the file became a confirmation that silence had finally broken. Emily chose not to attend the trial. She said she had already lived the evidence. Her justice was not in a courtroom, but in every morning she woke up and no longer wondered what she was allowed to feel. A year after her return, Emily stood in front of the same yard where she had disappeared. The fence had been replaced, the sidewalk had been repaved, but in the corner of the yard, just beside the garden bed, Danielle had preserved a section of the old concrete where the chalk sun had once been drawn. Time and weather had faded most of it, but a faint curve remained. Emily crouched beside it and placed her hand on the stone. She did not cry. She did not speak. She just stayed there for a moment, still and breathing. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small locket. It was old and scratched, but intact. She opened it, revealing a photograph of herself as a child, and another of Caleb holding her hand on their first day of school. She placed the locket gently on the concrete, then stood and walked back to the house. That night, over dinner, she asked if they could repaint her room. She said she wanted yellow walls. Something brighter, something warm. Danielle smiled. Caleb nodded, and Michael said he would buy the paint on the way home from work. The next morning, Emily joined them at the hardware store. She'd picked the shade herself. The name on the swatch read, Sunflower Field. It made her smile. That was the color she had always imagined when she dreamed of home. She wasn't dreaming anymore. She had come back. Not as a girl who had been stolen, but as a young woman who had found the strength to return. The story was no longer about what had been taken. It was about what had endured and what would be rebuilt. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe so we can keep bringing powerful stories like this to light. What part of Emily's journey struck you the most? Were you expecting that ending? Let us know in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Your thoughts matter here.